Good afternoon. Just after heavy lunch, right? I'll try my best to make it interesting to keep you guys awake. Okay. Right, so today what I'm going to share about is about threat analysis for OT ICS environment. How many of you all attended the morning sessions presented by Marco? Okay. He has explained the development in the OT environment, how it deviates from a very original OT system, right? Whatever things that I'm going to share later, it will be another possible deviations, right? Infusing of IT, IoT, IIoT, as well as 5G connectivity, possibly into the OT environment, okay? So this will be what I'll be covering. So I'll give some background about OT. I think I'll quickly run through this because most of you all should be aware of this, right? So the difference between OT and IT is that OT focuses very much on productivity, safety, and reliability. Whereas IT talking about confidentiality, availability, right? And the components involved in the OT environment are actually machine, equipment, assets, monitoring system, and control system. Whereas in the IT environment, we are talking about storage, we are talking about compute, we are talking about business applications, right? So the focus is very different, and the mindset is also very different. And OT elements were once not connected. All of us know. It's isolated, machinery, instrumentation control, but today, we have to look at it differently. OT network is also undergoing a digitalization. Reason being, there's a need to bring up the operational efficiency. There's a need to automate the system so that we can reduce the manpower cost. Okay, so connectivity, leveraging on COTS, commercial off-the-shelf equipment, solutions, integrating industry IoT, bringing in digital technologies are going to be a common place in the OT environment as well. Right. However, when all these things started to integrate into the OT environment, it also brings upon challenges, right? And how are we going to holistically manage such a complex environment? At the same time, we are also knowing clearly that in the OT environment, you want things like operational jurisdictions, right? So how are we going to manage this? And as I explained earlier, the OT cybersecurity is going to be complex because of the integration of the IT and OT, the extension of the operational perimeter by IIoT, right? And the introductions of all the commercial off-the-shelf components, right? And this certainly expanded the attack surface for OT network, right? This chart is not to tell you exactly what's happening in all the activity. The important thing of this chart is to tell you that in 2010, okay, in the early day, the number of OT attacks happened is like once in a few years or once in every 2 years. But you look at from 2020 onwards, within a year, there are a few big OT attack events. What that means? It means that that OT attack is going to be escalating, right? It could be because as IT network become more mature, IT cybersecurity become more mature, OT become the next easy target. right? And we should consider the digitalizations brought about the new threat that could happen in the OT environment. You know, the development, the evolutions of the AI, how AI can help the attacker to craft the more sophisticated attack TTP, okay? How the AI can help the attacker craft a better phishing email, right? So that will also bring a new aspect of a possible attack. We talked about supply chain, software supply chain yesterday, right? But supply chain attack is not only about software. It also related to the service, a third-party service provider coming into your OT environment, providing maintenance support, providing other software support, right? So all these third-party contractor coming into your OT environment, they could also be a potential target by the attacker, right? Deepfake and disinformation. Okay, two aspects of it. One is if I create a fake news, poison your threat intelligence. Okay, it can cause your defense, your cyber defense system to detect the wrong things, right? So deepfake and disinformation is also going to create a new dimension of cyber attack, right? And threat analysis arising from insider, backdoor, system integrator. Just now I mentioned a little bit on that. Insider attack, it could be intentional and unintentional, right? Intentional, of course, you know, they purposely go and hack into the system because of the user right that they have. Unintentional, it could be a simple case of picking up or go to some conference, you know, getting a free thumb drive, and then use it in the official, in the OT environment. That type of unintentional attack could also happen, right? As we all know that robotic is, the automation, robotic is also evolving in the industry, in the manufacturing industry, right? And a lot of all these robotic arms are all connected through a 5G network because of the low latency features, mass connectivity features that 5G offer. So the infusing of the 5G connectivity in the OT environment, in the manufacturing environment, will give another aspect of possible intrusions into the OT network. So all this actually brought about the complexity of safeguarding the OT environment or IIoT environment in the near future. This is a projection by Mandiant for 2023 about the OT environment, right? So Mandiant has clearly identified that the threat level and disruption to semiconductor manufacturer in Asia Pacific is likely to go up, right? As we all know that semiconductor is a key focus of US, of China, you know, they are all compete over the chip manufacturing capability, so that is an enablement towards AI capability, automation capability, right? So the semiconductor manufacturers are likely to be a common target that a lot of attackers are after. Then the other possibility is the Asia Pacific country that supported, you know, Ukraine, right, are likely to be the target by the pro-Russia hackers. Okay, so that is also another group of hacking activities that Mandiant has identified. So what are the challenges in defending the OT systems and OT network? We all know that the VAPT today in the OT environment is very manual and is tedious, manpower resource consuming, and sometimes can't even do it, right? So this is definitely a challenge, right? And there's also a lot of blind spot in the sense that we are unable to map out all the threats and assets that we have in the OT environment, right? Then the information gaps between the ICS and cybersecurity staff, the engineering staff and the cybersecurity staff, they don't talk the same language, right? So they can't understand each other's, right? Then the threat intelligence from various sectors and domains not relevant to sectors and region. Today, we are flooded with a lot of different types of threat intelligence, but not all threat intelligence are relevant to our own sectors, right? Information overload is a common thing. Don't think that the more intelligent you have, the better you will be. Intelligence that is not relevant to you, in fact, is interference or noise, right? Of course, determining and aligning business processes is also a gap if we don't really understand the so-called the plant processes well, right? Then, of course, there's also a need for us to adhere to IEC 62443 standards, and not to forget, in Singapore, we also need to comply to CSA CCOP 2.0, right? And we all know that there are a lot of legacy OT systems. And all the legacy software and system does not have sufficient protections. And some even can't even do proper patching, right? OT or CII operators sometimes might not willing to take the risk, right, to down certain system for maintenance. So there are systems that, very legacy systems that over the years has not been patched, has not been down for service. Okay, and a lot of the systems are working in isolations. So there's no integrated view. However, all these systems, at times, they have interdependency. So if we are looking at it from cybersecurity protection perspective, if we are looking at it in isolation, there are a lot of problems we cannot foresee, right? And there are also limited visibility in terms of health and entities from the network, right? The other challenges that we have is in terms of essential combinations and reinforcements of administrative, physical, and technical control for an effective outcome. So it is sometimes very difficult to justify for OT security if we always emphasize in terms of ROI, right? And there's also an increase in malicious behavior. There are more sophisticated malware in different form or in different nature due to the leveraging of the open source code, right? So I have shared about the complexity in the development in the OT environment. So how are we moving forward, how are we going to manage such a complex environment? So we have some possible approach on how to defend the OT environment effectively. So there are 4 types of threats. Threats that are arising from misconfiguration and asset placement, right? threats arising from modeling or machine learning anomaly, right? Threats from arising engineering fault or SCADA indicators. And finally, there will be also threats arising from behavioral analytics anomaly, right? So these are all the type of different threats that could trigger OT threat alerts. So what we think about the OT security strategy include the following. So at level 0, we should have a signal monitoring. At level 1 to 4, we should have a process monitoring. Right. On top of that, we should actually collect the data, the traffics at different levels to do anomaly detections. Right. So basically, anomaly detection alert, we are talking about collecting data from the process, from the log, to conduct behavioral analytics. Then at the same time, what we think is that there's a need to create a digital twin. A digital twin that similar to the actual OT environment. You can either create it via an automated process plus a manual process. So for example, you can be tapping the traffic out, okay, from the OT environment, trying to discover the number of assets. But through that, there are certain limitations. You might not have the actual detail about, for example, firmware versioning, software versioning, right? So the system should allow you to manually key in information that you cannot collect automatically. Once you have created a digital twin, then you can use a digital twin to link to external threat intelligence for you to proactively know what type of threats or what type of risks that you are facing in your OT environment. You can also use the digital twin to conduct simulated attack as well as for training, right? Then of course we call it a system called Global Checker. Global Checker is for us to actually correlate all the information that we have collected, right? Whether is it alerts or whether is it anomaly, and then present a holistic view on the threats, on the situation pictures of the OT environment. So this is just an example, okay? So cannot see the. So basically, at level 0, we are collecting the signal analysis, okay, to have the alert. For level 1 to 4, we are doing the process analysis, using the IDS to detect the alert. And then at the same time, we are collecting information like log analysis, the plant process baseline analysis, as well as the command analysis, all to a common system to associate all these together to actually give common situation pictures, right? At the same time, the digital twins that we talked about just now, that it can actually fit in the new vulnerability so that you can make assessment whether what type of risk or what type of threats that you are facing, okay, proactively. You can determine proactively about the threats that you are facing in your actual OT environment. So for this just 2 dashboards that we have created. One is for the overall process. Overall process is basically the OT environment that you have, right? And then this is the sensor and actuator. It can actually drill into the lower level to reflect the situations of the sensor and actuator. Then at the plant level monitoring, basically we have consolidated view of the entire plant on the alert count as well as the anomaly that you have detected. At the plant monitoring process level, we can actually go down to basically individual process and go down all the way to the actuator, to the sensor level. And then at every individual component, there's an indicator on the alert being picked up or anomaly being picked up. And this is actually at the sensor monitoring. Sensor monitoring is important in the sense that if any abnormal behavior, for example, the frequency, the speed, if you monitor purely at the process level, you may not be able to detect any differences. But if you go down to the so-called sensor level, the so-called the speed or the frequency change actually indicate that there's some anomaly. So sensor level monitoring provide real-time and the historical view of sensor telemetry, right? And it allows you to visualize the reading predicted by the model. I'll show you a video of a so-called a digital twin that can be created. This is idealistic. Not everything is fully automated. So it's a combination of automatically analyzing the network traffic plus manual updates to a digital twin.
Unveiling our innovative OT SCADA simulation system. Our OT SCADA simulation system is customized for your unique requirements. From staff training to system modification testing, from cybersecurity threat preparation to efficiency optimization, our platform provides a risk-free and real-world environment for achieving your objectives. Step into a new era of OT and SCADA system training and testing with our trailblazing simulation system. Safeguard your operations, empower your team, and stay one step ahead in an ever-evolving landscape. Our platform perfectly models the processes of your actual operational environments, from water plants to power generation and distribution facilities, providing a comprehensive and realistic training ground. The simulation system links to level 0 devices, including sensors, meters, and pumps, all interacting with a miniature replica of your plant. This unique feature provides an immersive and highly authentic learning experience. At the heart of our simulation lies the integration of real programmable logic controllers, PLCs, paving the way for practical training and testing scenarios which closely mimic real-world operations. These PLC are programmed and connected to level 0 devices, providing an authentic experience that aligns closely with actual industrial operations. Our platform can optionally replicate your existing security infrastructure, including firewalls, intrusion detection systems, security information and event management systems, and endpoint protection. This enables thorough security system testing and enhancement. Our platform offers the virtualization of crucial workstations such as the human-machine interface, HMI, engineering stations, historians, and databases, allowing for in-depth system understanding and exploration. Our platform can import all your system's configurations, security settings, and patch levels, ensuring a high-fidelity mirror of your lab environment. We mimic typical network traffic within the platform, presenting a complete and accurate representation of daily operations. Clients can opt for additional attack simulations or other security products to rigorously test their system's defenses and incident responses. Experience the future of operational technology, OT, and supervisory control and data acquisition, SCADA, testing, and training with our groundbreaking simulation system.
I'll now share a use case. So before sharing a use case, I wanted to highlight this chart, right? And this chart actually reflected clearly that in an OT environment, how does the attacker get into the OT systems, right? A lot of the time is about compromising the IT system, right? And then get into the OT ICS network. And it's about 40%. Okay? And the other one is a removable media. And the third one is an engineering workstation compromise. So actually most of the OT network compromise are via the IT network. Okay, so this is a OT cyber attack scenario that we have created, right? So basically, under one, in the IT environment, we assume that a remote attacker take over the engineering workstation. Okay, it could also be a maintenance personnel start malicious patch for software update. Then at point 2, basically within the control zone B, we are talking about a remote attacker already penetrated into the engineering workstation and take over the engineering workstation. Or insider actually conduct some attack via the engineering workstation. Then the OT environment, basically then the attacker trying to spoof the sensor reading, right? So this is actual plant setup, water plant setup in SUTD, one of the Singapore universities, right? We are using it to do the testing, right? And this is the attack scenario. So for the IT environment, basically we are talking about all the IT cybersecurity defense, okay? And then reach through the firewall, and we pick up all the log analysis. Okay, we do the analysis, and then all the command analysis as well. And at the same time, there will be engineering fault being picked up, different level of IDS alert, sensor alert. Okay, and all these combined together, we develop the association engine to actually highlight the alerts and anomaly that we can pick up. Okay, then this is a dashboard that we have created. This is a plant monitoring. And at different points, there are number indicating the number of alert anomaly picked up at different stage. So this is a video showing how actually pick up. And then we can drill into detail on exactly what are the possible fault. Right? And there are fault tree, there are anomaly tree being picked up. So this is a possibility that it provides you a full visibility of your OT environment. Cybersecurity visibility, right? Okay, so in conclusions, we know clearly that digitalizations of the OT environment, OT network, to increase the operational efficiency, will bring about complexity in the OT environments, bring about the complexity in cybersecurity, open up the attack surface, expanding the attack surface of the cyber threat, right? And anomaly detections in the OT environment does not necessarily conclude that it is a cyber attack. It could also be a system malfunction. But at least that triggers you to conduct an investigation, right? And proactive assessment and identifications of the live OT network required to fix the vulnerability can be achieved if you create a digital twin, right? And my concluding statement is OT network is likely to be the next battleground, right? As we see the number of big OT attack event has happening over the last 2 years. Okay. With that, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lim. Let us now invite our moderator for the session, Mr. Neil McElhinney, Head of Cyber Defense Solutions at Thales. Mr. McElhinney, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for the presentation, Dr. Lim. As you quite rightly pointed out, it is the afternoon session. It's a tough gig, but we are going to try and keep it interesting for you. We won't do that by ourselves, so I'd like to welcome Justin and Dean up to the stage to help us out with that. Also, I might add that you have the ability to ask questions during this as well, so please do submit them. They'll come up on my iPad, and we'll go through them throughout the course of this short session. Thank you, guys. So to start off then, I think I'd like to build perhaps a little bit on your presentation. I think everyone in this room knows that, you know, as our OT systems, our ICS systems become more and more connected, more and more dependent on perhaps what we would call traditional IT systems, that they're inherently going to be more susceptible to vulnerabilities and to threats. And then what I understood from what you were saying, that perhaps there is an opportunity here to create simulations, digital twins, to help us understand that threat a little bit more, and to do threat analysis in a safe environment that then allows us to perhaps apply lessons that we learn there in the real environment. So Justin, perhaps just initially on that, what are your thoughts on that? Is that a valid way to do better threat analysis? And then I guess the second part of that is you also mentioned that you know, in the real world, plant managers, for example, are very risk adverse. So if we learn something in a benign environment, then how can we convince, you know, the people that operate plants to apply what we've learned in the real environment?
Yeah, I think when it comes to digital twins, I think the use of digital twins from an engineering perspective is fairly well understood and fairly mature. You know, where for those that aren't interested in digital twins, right, it's instead of simulating elements of a system, we're actually trying to make more accurate readings from some type of a component or process, and actually try to emulate more pieces of that, so then we can go ahead and have better simulations to test different scenarios for our processes. So while this is mature, I think in the engineering side, I think it's far less mature when it comes to use in cybersecurity, because quite often we're dealing with the communication inputs into these different systems, which are not always represented inside of the digital twins. So I think that's one of the bigger challenges we've had, and we've never really had, I think, good products that are out there to be able to analyze our existing systems and be able to create in a time-efficient way a digital twin model that we can actually test against. So I personally think that's probably the biggest challenge we have.
I fully agree. So that's things that we are trying to do now, that we are trying to combine the automated way as well as a manual input to actually to make sure that it is more accurately representing the actual environment, right? I think we also talk about active scanning, you know, that type of thing, which in the OT environment, a lot of OT operator is saying no, you know, that type of thing, right?
Because getting your endpoints, right, IP address endpoints and what services they're using is something that's fairly easy to get, either from, you know, passive network capture or active scanning, and if you want the best, a combination of both. Right. But the problem is in order to do scenarios for threat analysis from a cybersecurity perspective, we need to actually we need to have something behind that service. We need to have the actual endpoints, the actual tags that are available, some type of a process that's actually there, which is kind of the harder part to try to simulate and generate.
Is there perhaps, maybe one for you, Dale, something that we can learn from other sort of disciplines then in this? If we're saying, for example, you know, that it's quite a mature type of technology in engineering, for example, that how do we do that cross-pollination to ensure that cyber professionals can then use that and then play that back into the engineering world?
Well, I think we might be talking about different kinds of digital twins. I think it's a simulation of something, right? It is a digital simulation of something. And the digital twins that I'm most familiar with and that you tend to read about if you go to the Digital Twin Consortium or something like that are emulating or simulating the process itself, and is typically used for predictive maintenance. So normally I would clean this thing every 6 months, but for some reason it's experiencing greater wear based on my simulation and the statistics coming in, so I do earlier maintenance or efficiency studies or things like that. And I have seen, actually, I think it's a holy grail. It's called process variable anomaly detection. So imagine you're in your car and you push down on the accelerator or the gas pedal. You would expect the engine to rev. So in a complex system with all these points monitoring it, you can look for correlations and anti-correlations between all these values. And I've actually seen that if you were to Google GE Digital Ghost S4, the GE, for their turbine control system and their turbine itself for power generation, they have a digital twin, and then they have a digital ghost that sits on top of it that's doing these correlation, and it's saying, this data doesn't make sense. There's no way this can be true here and here and here, and so you either are getting a bad sensor data or someone's attacking you, but we're just telling you it doesn't make sense. And Digital Ghost actually sends back what it thinks the right values are. So I think it's, when you have a digital twin for other reasons, I think we're really going to be able to leverage it for security. It is quite a heavy lift to get a high-fidelity digital twin at the beginning, though.
And when we reach that stage, I mean, so I come back to my point about, okay, so we can use that to understand the threats and what might happen in our networks. But then from there, we want to create mitigation strategies to be able to ensure these things don't happen, right? What can we do to move that agenda along? So we understand the threat, we know what needs to be done. What are the actions we need to take with plant managers, with management to say, we need to go beyond this risk-adverse nature and actually implement solutions in our OT networks to defend against this type of attack?
What I think is it actually serves the purpose to give you early warning on the potential risks that you will be facing. So there are two things. If you can't patch it in time, you can't fix it in time, at least you have another monitoring in place. You know that component is subject to some risk, so you add on, and you cannot fix it, but if you watch it, for example, like your house, if your lock is being broken and you can't get a contractor to fix it in time, but at least you install a camera to watch over it, to make sure that no intruder actually coming in. So that is also a layer of protection.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to like traditional digital twins, when we're actually simulating the process, right, I think we have to kind of think about it in two different elements. If we're going to be using a digital twin from that engineering traditional perspective, I think we could go ahead and start simulating what are the consequences of certain actions, assuming an attacker can cause those actions inside of the process. I think we can leverage the digital twin models for that, but it's not going to help you necessarily figure out, you know, what is the path that an attacker actually takes inside of the network to be able to get to it in the first place. So you kind of start with the assumption, assuming an attacker gets to a point where they can control the process, you know, if the attacker did X, Y, or Z, what type of an effect would that have on the process? I think that's where the digital twin probably would come in useful.
Actually, on top of that, I think a digital twin also allows us to conduct training, conduct exercise. I think that will also be useful. Yeah.
I think it's a good time to bring in a question from the, if I get this wrong, right, I'll read it out, but I'll give it a go. Because you give us a demonstration of one solution there. So other than that, are there any other threat analysis solutions on the market that would be of interest to the audience that perhaps could build on what you've done so far and would complement it?
You mean threat analysis solution?
Yeah, or the solution that you had in the video.
Yeah. Okay. I think in the market there are a few threat analysis solutions. If you are talking about the digital twin, if you are referring to digital twin, this is something that we are still building. The video is more a presentation of the ideal stage that we want to achieve, right? It's still a system in development, right? I have a conversation with Justin. He mentioned about, you mentioned about you are also working on digital twin, right?
A couple different aspects of it, right? Because when we talk about digital twin using that terminology,
Yeah.
it's once again, it's usually the simulation of the process itself, not the IT elements and the communication interfaces.
Right.
Right? So if you wanted to kind of take a similar parallel in the cybersecurity world, right, that would be kind of more similar to more like honeypot solutions, where we're trying to simulate it from a network communication interface, which once again wouldn't necessarily traditionally be called a digital twin, but that would be probably the closest parallel that I could think of inside of the cybersecurity space.
Actually, not necessarily. A honeypot is more for deception purposes. You don't need to be exactly the same. You're just creating certain critical component that the attacker is interested to go after, right? I think even in the IT space, digital twin, we are talking about really doing the assets discovery so that you map out exactly the actual environment, so that you can simulate, you can use it to do breach attack and simulations, that type of thing.
Yeah, and that's one thing that's I think is interesting about the solution that you were presenting is you had mentioned that looking at network captures or something, you would try to create that network environment of the different IP endpoints and the different ports that are there. But in order to really do a threat analysis, as a penetration tester, I would need to have something behind that port, right? And so how would your solution that's purely passive, monitoring, right, identify what are the tag values and the process loops behind the scenes?
Okay, so as I qualified earlier, that it cannot be fully automated. Because purely based on the passive sniffing of the network traffic, you can only map out to a certain level. As you rightly pointed out, you will not have the detailed information, things like the firmware version, the software version, the detailed processes in the network. So some of these, in our opinion, if you cannot do active scanning, then you have to manually key in and build the digital twin through a manual process. Yeah.
Can I just answer your question, though, I think, is if you're talking about understanding the network and identifying anomalies, if you're talking about behavioral anomalies, if you're talking about functional anomalies, there's a lot of companies doing that. Dragos, Clarity, Nozomi, Rataflow, Armis. There were about 15, 20 more that were doing that. Now, not all the elements of what you talked about there, but there is, that's been really probably where most of the VC money has gone in the last 5 years. Close to what do you think? It were probably at least $500 million of VC money. So there's a lot of solutions out there that are doing parts of this encompassing.
And but to your point, as we discussed before, one of the first things you need to understand is what you're trying to protect, and doing asset discovery is a good way of doing that. And as I shared with you guys before.
And I would say that would be more the traditional threat analysis, right?
Yeah.
Is understanding what's currently going on, but that's once again absent of any simulation.
Yeah.
So in fact, one of the components that we use is ReadyFlow for the alerting, right? But on top of that, we actually add in our own anomaly detections engine. Yeah.
What would be your advice on the right approach to selecting some of those tools or those capabilities for your networks? How would you go about doing that? Perhaps Dale, you'd like to reflect on that.
I think this is a great question. What I always recommend is you have a lot of detection choices, these tools being one of them. And you create a list of the things that you can do to help you detect cyber incidents. And then you look from an efficiency standpoint, where am I going to get the best detection, most real positives, fewest false negatives, at what cost? And I create this list and I prioritize it, and I say, okay, I have this much to spend, and I draw a line, I do everything above it. So I see a lot of people that will have antivirus and other endpoint detection, and they're not monitoring it. So it gets alerts, and it might stop it, but they've got malware running around, they never follow it. Or you've got a firewall, are you monitoring the logs? So you have a number of things that are pretty already there, you shouldn't get many false positives. So I think That's how I do it, and just figure out where you want to draw that line.
Yeah, I agree with the, if you don't draw that line, alert fatigue will kick in. And eventually, nobody will going to fix any of the alert, right? So I think we need to know the severity of that anomaly or the attack. So you draw that line, you clearly focus on the more critical risks and fix those first, right?
Yeah, and I would say that you would also want to understand that of all the tools that are out there, we often talk about these tools as OT tools or ICS tools. The problem is all these tools actually are not, they're not competitors to each other, right? They provide different capabilities. And I would say that you need to ask yourselves, what feature are you expecting out of this tool? Are you looking for a feature to be able to detect that an attacker is attacking you? If so, you need to look at the ones that do passive network monitoring, like the Dragos and the Nozomis, or some type of an endpoint solution that's on the endpoint, monitoring the endpoints or probing that endpoint to try to detect, baselines on that endpoint. Those are the two best ways, and if you can have both, that gives you the most full, complete picture, detecting when there's some type of a compromise, right? Of course, there's challenges installing things on your endpoints, depending on what you're talking about. Now, if your goal is to try to identify vulnerabilities inside of your systems or missing patches inside of your systems, then passive network monitoring is not the way to go. Password network monitoring can detect no more than about 5% of the assets, the versions, and the vulnerabilities that are there. If you want to detect vulnerabilities, you have to have some component that does active scanning that probes the device to be able to query the exact software that's there, the exact version that's there, so they can look that up inside of a database, which, by the way, is why Nozomi and Dragos and all the vendors that do password network monitoring, within the last year or two, all of them have added some type of a active scanning capability to be able to get real vulnerability information, which they had advertised before, which they had never really fully met until they added active scanning.
Just one other quick point. When you're looking at these, make sure you include the labor costs to do this, because there's a vast difference in the various detection options as to how much it's going to cost you to actually get the benefits that the solution offers.
And whatever the vendor says, times it by 2, and that's a more realistic number. Brutally honest, right? Brutally honest. Ask your vendor. They're the best one that's going to have an idea of what's there, but you should be projecting double whatever they're actually saying as a more realistic. Whatever the vendor says is usually the bare bones basic number of staff you're going to need for however big your deployment is.
Yeah, and I mean, it's one tool in the chest, right? So we don't rely on one particular active or passive scanning. It's one thing that we have to understand what's going on our networks. What do you guys think is the most? I'm just making sure I answer your questions. the most efficient way to do threat analysis on an OT network. Is there a particular way you would recommend?
Yes.
Go for it.
Everything. No, not everything, but honestly, when we do different types of assessments, right, the more different types of assessments you can do of that environment, the more you're going to understand of that environment, because each of the different types of assessment, be it vulnerability scanning, be it network capture and network monitoring from like the Dragos and the Nozomis, doing some type of an audit, correlating that to a standard configuration review, all of these different assessment types use different set of facts, right? And they're going to have the capability of identifying different types of weaknesses or vulnerabilities in your system. So the more varied types of assessments you can perform in that environment, the different perspective you look at that environment with each one, and the more complete picture you're going to have for the vulnerabilities that's there. You just have to figure out how to make that scalable within the resources, the team you have, and the budgets you have, right? That's the hard part.
The best system is to allow you to drill in from one level to another level to have a detailed perspective. Yeah, and the whole threat situation is integrated rather than in isolation of the different security systems.
And working with your engineering team, right?
Yes.
The cybersecurity team can't do anything unless they have a partnership with the engineers.
Okay. Just quickly back on the digital twin subject. There's a lot of interest on that, as you can imagine. And one, I guess everyone is conscious of budgets and of course how much these sort of things are going to cost if you wanted to replicate it in their environments. Are there any open source tooling to create digital twins if they wanted to do this on their own?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, not that I'm aware of as well.
Most of the digital twins that, you know, in the definition that I said, where you're modeling the process itself, are coming from either the vendor that installed it, and they typically are more common where the installations are very stereotypical or consistent. And then some integrators are doing it as well. And the other thing to note is sometimes they're subsystems. They're not the whole system. So I've seen like a digital twin of a boiler management system in a plant. So you're going to get that. But I would start with your vendor or your integrator. They might be the ones who could help you.
And to be honest, I've never seen a cybersecurity team with the budget to be able to afford something like that.
I don't think cyber is going to drive digital,
No.
the process simulation digital twins.
Yeah.
I think it's more of, if you get one, hey, it's another tool you can use in cyber.
Yeah, beg, borrow from your engineers.
So they have the money, right? So you know who you need to go to. Okay, so looking at threat analysis again, right? And I just want to pick up maybe on the start of it, the first part of your presentation, because I think you covered quite clearly some of the challenges we have, and we understand that the things are getting more complex, and that we're building, you know, integrating more IT systems into traditional OT. And yes, it's getting more complicated, but quite frankly, I think we've been saying this for a long time, right? You know, certainly in my mind, the discussions haven't moved on that much from the cybersecurity perspective, right? Our story has been constant and consistent. How can we, you know, try and move that agenda forward to really make managers, you know, the board understand the severity of this challenge and the problem that we have, and actually, you know, what do we need to do to make that happen and allow us to progress this in the right way. So the next time we're having this event, we can say we've made progress.
Well, I guess I agree with a lot of things that you had on the slides, but that's kind of the glass half empty look. If you think about it in the OT world, we're talking about a specific purpose network, right? And we're talking about a limited number of users who are not doing email, not accessing the internet to visit websites. They're not downloading and installing a lot of applications. We have fairly stereotypical traffic, as you pointed out, that we can say, hey, is this something different than what we've experienced in terms of volume, in terms of paths, in terms of commands? So we actually should be able, in my mind, to do a lot better than IT. And I would say if you looked at the statistics right now, I don't know if it's 100 to 1 or 1,000 to 1 in terms of companies that have IT and OT, they have both of them, the number of incidents they've had on IT and the number of incidents they've had on OT, and the impact. So we really have to be careful when we go to the board or something and say the sky is falling, because the board isn't, they're going to look at the numbers. You know, so I would say the way I approach the board is more from this, what are the high consequence events that could happen? We haven't been hit, but if this happens, how fast can we recover? We need more money for recovery, or we need more money for redundancy, or we need more physical controls, or, you know, in that sense. I think if you try to hit them with, oh, look how much more frequent the attacks. I mean, your slide was nice, but there weren't many attacks up there over 10, 15 years compared to the other things. There's a lot more hurricanes and windstorms and rainstorms and floods than there are that. So I'm not sure we're going to have a lot of traction if we hit the board with numbers.
Yeah, I think that when you go to the board, right, having a good, realistic cohesive narrative for the story you're trying to tell, because they tend to understand those storylines, not the the sky is falling stories, but the more of how you actually fit into the business. What are the benefits that you're actually bringing? I think the other mistake that a lot of cybersecurity teams make is when they give metrics back to the board, they want to show value of their team. So they have very favorable metrics showing all the good they're doing, which is important. But we also need to be very transparent with what we're not doing. So if you're providing metrics to the board for, say, you have a patching initiative inside of OT, and you're saying, you know, of our OT environment, we have this percentage patched inside of the environment. The other metric you need to show them is how many assets are we not tracking, right? If I have 5,000 assets and I'm only tracking 500 of the 5,000, right? As part of the, you know, of the 500, I have, you know, 50% patched. Great. Right? But we're only tracking 10% or 5% of the total number of assets that's there. So once again, be transparent with where the struggles are on your teams, because otherwise you won't get the funding for that. Other things to think of that I've seen, you know, more creative ways I've seen my clients do this is if you work for a firm that's actually selling some type of a product, so manufacturing, pharmaceutical, chemical, sometimes you can actually talk to the product teams that are actually selling the products and work in cybersecurity into their narratives for sales, showing that what you're doing on cybersecurity to safeguard whatever that product is, and be able to maybe draw some additional funds from some of these other types of areas. I've seen that. It surprised me, but it actually had worked in a few scenarios, which I thought was pretty interesting. The other thing is when you talk to management, if all of our industries and all of our governments are saying that the threat of cyber attack is far greater than physical attack, and if you do Google searches, these are trivial quotes to find, right? One question to go back and ask the team is, well, how big is the physical security budget compared to the cybersecurity budget? Because usually the cybersecurity budget's a very small fraction by comparison. And we're not saying take away from physical security, but just to challenge management in their thinking about where they're dividing up the funds.
One of the things that I think we struggle with is articulating these things correctly. And when we talk about threat analysis, we tend to talk about the technical stuff, right? Bad things are happening on the network. But you have to provide the context of that for the board to understand. And that comes down to risk management, I think. What helps me, I think, in my daily job is having a risk framework that matches everything else that they know. You know, so we don't talk about, I don't know, you know, the network's going to fall over, and that's a bad thing. But we talk about loss of reputation, loss of, you know, production, and these sort of things, which I think is the right way to go. But being able to take what we've discussed here in terms of threats and analysis of that, and then project it through that sort of risk framework is, I think, quite challenging. Have you guys seen any examples of that work well?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, you definitely should look for your company's risk management program. It usually has this 5x5 chart, likelihood down one side, consequence on the other, with categories like you say, reputation, financial loss, customer impact, health and safety. And you just map, well, if the bad guys get in and they take out this power plant, where does that fall in this thing? And sometimes it'll surprise you because, you know, I've seen cases where the people in the power plant think, this is in the US, they think if a power plant has went out, it's going to be a high consequence event. In the US, no, they'll just buy power from somewhere else. You know, as long as the equipment isn't damaged. Now, if you damage a turbine, that's going to cost them some money. If you cause an outage for a week, so it's really important to lean back on that. And it does work, just like you said.
Yeah, exactly. It's the impact and likelihood, that chart, right? Yeah. That we need to bring from the top right corner down to the top bottom left corner, right, to reduce the risk and likelihood.
And if you're a manager, the OT cybersecurity team, and you've never actually met the safety engineers for the company and their group, you have a thing to add to your list for next week to do. Yep. You need to work with the safety engineers and integrate your programs. You know, at least take input from their programs and try to build partnerships there.
Yeah, one of the things that we're quite familiar with, I guess, is safety cases. You know, and then you can use cyber, or you could have cyber in that context, right? In the context of safety, which I think is very well understood whenever you articulate things in that way. Some more from the audience. I noticed we got an extension of time. Is that right? Yes, because the
Like 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, I know. We must be so interesting. But so again, there's a lot of questions still on the digital twin side. So I think we've got to do it justice. How difficult would it be to build one of these things? We've talked about the products and what we do, but if you wanted to start a project to build this type of capability, where would you start, and how much money would you need to spend, and how many resources would you need?
If anyone knows the answer, come see me after this, because I have been trying to get that presentation on my S4 stage for years. Is there a simple way of taking it? Because imagine you're a company that has 20 manufacturing plants producing a similar product, but they might have different control systems, slightly different things. How can I create 20 digital twins quickly? And I've talked to people that create digital twins, and I still don't understand the answer to that question. They can do it for you, but they can't explain the process. It seems to be very, very manually intensive right now. It's not automated, and it's not efficient and cheap.
And most of it's cookie cutter from what I've seen. It's not replicating your environment, it's replicating a similar, power plant or a manufacturing line that they kind of have, some configurations you might be able to add to customize it, but for the most part, it's not an exact replica or even close.
And then that's of less use.
Yes.
Of less value to you. So the ones that have the really good ones have those very stereotypical products and solutions, and then they tweak it for the individual settings.
I think if you want to create a digital twin, you need to know clearly that you are creating a digital twin for what type of purposes. If you are creating it for maintenance purposes, then you really need to go into the engineering part of it. If you are creating for cybersecurity perspective, maybe you're focusing on certain level, the network level, the instrumentation control level might be suffice. Yeah. So it depends on the purpose of the digital twin.
Well, yeah, and you can buy the digital twin you're describing today is available at various levels of quality and completeness. So yeah, what you're talking about is available off the shelf.
There are several solutions to that out there. but I guess it's about, I don't think they're all the same, right? You really got to know what you want to achieve, first of all, and then you work backwards from that, I think is the best way. Because you could build it yourself. I think there are, technologies that can help you, but starting from scratch on a very low budget, I think is probably, to experiment initially, and then if you want to invest more in it, don't go all in, right? To stick your toe in the water, see if you like it, and then continue from there. What about real life examples then, guys? So where you've seen good threat analysis, and then it has a real world impact in improving the situation within a particular environment. Have you got any sort of examples you can give us where you've seen this done well?
Okay. So for our case, we work with a CII partner and getting the live traffics to do analysis, right? Personally, I think if we want to design a threat analysis, you really need the domain knowledge. You need to work with we call it design partner. Design partner like a CII operator. You design the threat analysis or detection engine according to the environment. And how good your detection engine is, it depending on how in-depth of that domain knowledge that you have, right? You can't, it's very difficult for IT security people to develop an OT detection engine because they don't have the domain knowledge. So the domain knowledge, basically working with the OT engineer, is important, right?
The only thing I would add is I haven't seen the product being the gating factor very often. It's usually that information gets sent to some SOC or some group, And that's where they have the trouble. They get the data and they're not really sure what to do with it. So I think, well, I'll just stop there.
Yeah, ultimately, your threat analysis is really a human process that's going to be using several different tools and other feeds of information. And I think the biggest thing that I would recommend if a company wants to do some type of a threat analysis is be specific. What are you trying to measure? Right? Am I talking about what are the threats of an attacker getting to this system, or am I talking about what could an attacker do if they get to the system? Right? So I think that really comes down, the more specific that you actually tie it to real world devices, the more then you actually start having real world data that you can use to do the threat analysis.
I agree, and I mean, at the end of the day, the clue's in the title, right? A box, a product is not going to solve this for you. You need to do the homework, right? And
Yeah.
that requires people and experience and understanding, the impact of these threats in our networks, which is ultimately the job of cyber professionals in this room. Yeah, so I think that's really the key for it. Is you can have as much data as you want, but you need to know what to do with it and put context around that.
Tools amplify what our teams can do and our personnel, right? And a good tool can amplify the effectiveness of one single person, right? The inclusion of machine learning and artificial intelligence in our tools that we've been seeing the progress, and we expect more progress in the future, that can further increase that multiplier for the staff. But remember, a multiplier of something like 0.1 or 0.4 of a person or a staff, right? It rounds to 0 before it rounds to 1, right? So multipliers need to have some type of a number of staff to base it upon. If you don't have at least a minimum number of staff to be able to run the tool, you're not getting an amplifying effect. You're actually getting something that's rounding to 0, meaning you're not getting any value out of the tool.
Exactly. Yeah. We have a few minutes left, and I was reliably told that we could take questions from the floor as well. So has anyone got any questions that we haven't already answered? No? Nothing from the front row here?
We're not getting down until somebody asks a question.
We've done a good job then, right? So, all right, guys. So, look, that was very interesting. I think for me, definitely, it's a complex subject. It's clear there are many ways of doing this, right? I think we summarized it quite clearly last time. It's really people and technology together will do good threat analysis, and then the context around that. Really, to get the message up there and get the funding we need to continue our journey in protecting OT networks. So thank you very much for your time. I think it was a good discussion. Thank you all for listening and staying with us. Yeah.